Hey guys, I think I just found an amazing PC flip opportunity, as a customer recently reached out saying that they wanted to go ahead and sell their gaming PC as they only bought it about less than a year ago for about $1,400, and the system currently sells brand new on Best Buy's website for about $1,150 after doing some research. After talking with the customer, I was able to get them down to about $350 because there's one big catch. The system doesn't currently work, as they actually took it to another PC repair shop where they claimed that there was an issue with the motherboard. So we're gonna have to do some diagnostic work and go ahead and get the system back up and running before we sell it. So I'm gonna take you guys along for the journey, and I'm gonna go ahead and buy the system, and I'll be back in just a little bit to go ahead and get this system repaired. All right, everyone, we are back now, and we can go ahead and get this system tested and repaired. So the system actually came out in pretty good shape. There were a couple different concerns I did have. First off, I was a little bit concerned the system actually came completely unplugged, but there was one big bonus I didn't really realize until after talking with the customer more, is they had actually upgraded the RAM, so instead of 16 gigabytes of RAM that it came with, it actually has 32, which is a nice little upgrade. So let's go ahead and get the system plugged back up because it was unplugged from the last shop, and then let's go ahead and test it out and see if we can get the system up and running. All right, to plug this in, we just have to plug in the 24 pin, which is right here. The 8 pin up in the top, and then we have the PCIe 8 pin for the GPU. All right, let's go ahead and turn the system on and see if it works. All right, the system's all wired up again, so let's go ahead and fire it up and see if it actually works. Ooh, so we're not getting LEDs on that front fan. I can see that. There's only one fan with LEDs, so we have to figure that out. And besides that, let's see if the system will post. We have a monitor here connected to the GPU. So after letting the system run for about a minute, the system still wasn't turning on, so let's go ahead and do a little bit of diagnostic work to go ahead and make sure that it is the motherboard before we go ahead and swap that out. So give me 1 second. So the first thing I want to do in this case, we're going to shut the system off, unplug everything, and then I'm going to go ahead and just pull this GPU out and throw in a card that I know that works, just so we can go ahead and rule that out of the equation, because that could always be a possibility of what could be causing some of these issues. So let's go ahead and get this unscrewed. And pop out that little cover and grab the one screw that's holding in the GPU. There we go. And we can pop out our PCIe cable and push down on the lever to go ahead and pop out our GPU, which is kind of a little stuck. There we go. All right, so here's our RTX 3060. I'm hoping this isn't what went down, because that will be probably the most expensive fix if that is the case. So let's go ahead and grab a card. I think I had one lying around. Yep, I do. We're going to go ahead and throw this card in. This will go ahead and allow us to see if maybe the GPU is actually causing the issue. All right, let's go ahead and get this installed. All right, that's all plugged in. Let's throw in the 8-pin connector for it. Make sure we're getting power. That looks all good to go. Let's go ahead and plug in the actual system. We don't need to put all the screws in just yet. So we're just trying to get the system fired up, because once we do that, we'll have a lot more flexibility on what we do from there. Because we're going to have to actually take the system apart to go ahead and get it cleaned up as well. All right, firing the system up. Take a look. We got a new GPU plugged in. No other changes. Let's see if the system happens to work now. Did sound a little better. And we are getting display. So we might have a bad GPU. We're going to need to rule that, take that, go ahead and test a couple things to make sure. But the system is loading up, which does indicate that we're probably dealing with the GPU issue, but there's a couple other options that could be going on. And I'm really hoping that it's not a bad GPU, because if that's the case, we might be in a little bit of rough shape with this card not working, because it's going to be an expensive repair. We probably won't put a 3060 in it, probably something like a 1660, just because that'll allow us to still possibly make a profit on this. So let's go ahead and get the system. See, it loaded right up. Let's go ahead and turn this system off, and let's go ahead and do some more tests with that GPU to make sure that's not what's causing the issue, because it could be that it wasn't seated properly or a couple other issues. So let's go ahead and try that. All right, guys, so I have my test bench up here, and we're going to be testing if this GPU actually works on a separate system. This way we can indicate if this GPU is actually failed, or if it's just an issue with the computer and there's something on this side that's actually going wrong. As we know that the PCIe slot, motherboard, and CPU are likely working on this system, we'll probably be dealing with a power failure if the system doesn't work. So let's go ahead and fire the system up. turn that on, and let's see if it loads up into the BIOS to go ahead and see if the system's working. Let's go ahead and give it a second. It really should only take, and look, we're getting display out. Okay, so that means this GPU is likely still good because it is displaying out, which is a really great thing right now, because we know that the system could be working with just a couple minor repairs. So we already tested the PCIe power. Let's go ahead and let's try with a different power supply. I think that might be a good way to go ahead and see if that will get the system up and running. We'll use this system power supply for my test bench just to test it externally. See if the wiring that up will go ahead and allow us to actually work with the system, and then kind of go from there. So let me go ahead and get that wired up, and I'll be right back. All right, we have the system now wired up with a separate power supply. We're gonna go ahead and test that to see if that will allow us to get the system back up and running. So let's go ahead and try that. All right. The fans in the front and back aren't gonna work because I believe those are wired over Molex, but let's see if we get power over to our display, or a signal over to our display. We should see that fairly shortly. Seems to almost just be like it's looping because I did hear it kind of restart 2 times there. So it might be something else is going on. So let's go ahead and just see if something else is preventing it from starting up, because it booted with the other GPU. And we know that this GPU works on my other system. So we're probably talking about something else then. Let's go ahead and go through the diagnostic process with this and figure out what else could be causing this to behave the way it is. Because we know this power supply works for sure, and everything is wired up correctly. So let's go ahead and try a couple things. One of the first things I'm going to probably want to try in this circumstance is also, let's just go down to 1 stick of RAM. I tested the other stick of RAM earlier when we were using the test bench, and the system worked just fine. So let's just try that real quick. That was something that the customer did change at a certain point. So let's go ahead and just narrow that out of the question, just because I don't really want to have to deal with that if that is the case later on. So the system is ramping up, and we have still no display out. Make sure we're on the right input. Yep, that is, nothing is coming on the HDMI signal there. And I've already tried the display port, which sometimes can be the case where one of the ports is bad, but that didn't work as either, and that HDMI does work on the other system, so I know that's actually working. So let's go ahead and go through, maybe let's disconnect the drive. Sometimes the drive will actually cause some issues, so let's go ahead and do that real quick. There's 2 drives in the system, an actual hard drive and then a M.2 SSD. So I'm actually going to disconnect the hard drive, just because sometimes SATA interface drives, if they're failing, can cause the system to not boot up at all. So let's go ahead and try that real quick. As a precautionary measure, I went ahead and unplugged the SATA drive just to go ahead and see if that possibly was causing the issue. So let's go ahead and fire the system up, see if it'll load up. We are on a separate power supply still, just because I believe that may be causing some issues, was the internal power supply. And now we can go ahead and see if the system will load up. So let's go ahead and give it a second and see if the system will turn on. So the system seems to be power cycling. It's like restarting after every little bit. So I think I want to go ahead and just do a quick BIOS reset by pulling out that CMOS battery. This is a new board, but I'm going to go ahead and just try that real quick. So the CMOS battery will actually keep a lot of information with how the system is set up. So if there's any kind of configuration that was done with the system previously before the system started not working, we can go ahead and reset all those settings by just popping out this little coin battery. So we got that battery out right now. We'll leave it out for a second. We can press the power button, and then we can go ahead and just pop this battery back in. It's a nice, easy little fix. And now we can go ahead and try to restart the system back up. We're still using the separate power supply. We have the SATA drive disconnected. Let's see if this allows us to go ahead and start the system up. We'll give it about a minute to go ahead and see if the system loads up. Sometimes after a CMOS restart or CMOS reset, it can take a second for the system to kind of load up. So let's give that a minute. All right, so at this point, we basically have tested every single aspect of the system, including the memory, the SSD. We've tested the GPU, swapped the GPU, and we've got the system up a couple different times. And when it did, the system kind of stayed up, and it kind of would crash. And it's kind of gotten stuck in this looping phase of powering up, shutting off, powering up, shutting off. And that's normally an aspect with the motherboard, usually when you get that kind of weird sporadic behavior. And we know this GPU worked when we were on our test bench, So I'm really believing that we're probably going to have that bad motherboard that the other shop claimed, but I wanted to rule out everything else before we went ahead and did that. But fortunately, I have a B450 board that is compatible with this Ryzen 5600X, and it should have everything that we need to go ahead and get the system installed and back up and running. So what we're going to do is we're going to transfer everything over to this board right here and get this installed. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, to transfer everything over, we're going to go ahead and just open up this box, pull out our motherboard, unwrap it, and normally what I like to do is just go ahead and just set it right on top, because that makes the process much easier for working with it. So we got the board right there. Now what we're going to do is pull everything off of this and everything we already have, move it over here, and we should be good to go. So let's go ahead and take this, put all the stuff on the board first so we can put in our RAM. So we got sticks in 2 and 4, because those are the slots we're going to want to use. And there we go. We are in all the way there. All right, so we got our memory in. We're going to put our M.2 in real quick. This is nice and easy. Pull that screw out. Go ahead and throw our 500 gigabyte NVMe M.2 drive right there. And then we just screw this back into place. And that drive is now installed. All right, the next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to need to move this cooler and CPU assembly over. To do that, we're going to have to remove this cooler, and I'm going to actually go clean that as we go through this process to go ahead and clear out some dust. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. Because this cooler is filthy as well as the rest of the case, I think I'm going to go ahead and just get that cleaned up right now while we have the system disassembled, and then we'll put everything back together. Cooler now cleaned off, let's go ahead and just transfer everything over. It should be pretty quick. For the CPU, we're just going to go ahead and open up the lever, pop it out, open up the lever on the new motherboard, and go ahead and just slot that CPU right in. Lower that down, and our 5600X is now installed. And then we're going to go ahead and just remove the mounting hardware, as we're going to be using a different set. We use some Arctic MX6 for the thermal paste. It's my go-to. And we're going to put the cables going up towards the top to make things a little simpler for cable management. There, and let's get this installed. All right, motherboard's ready to go. We can go ahead and get this installed on the system. First thing we want to do in this case is go ahead and just pop in the I/O shield we got right here. All right, and we are good to go there. Now we can just go ahead and throw this board in. Just go ahead and slide it into place. Make sure everything gets lined up in the back here. Now we can just throw in this GPU and fire the system up. All right, we have the brand new motherboard installed in the system, so let's go ahead and fire it up, see if everything's working, and go from there. All right, turn the system on. And there we go. We can see that the motherboard just popped up. We're going ahead and basically telling us that the system was just reset, new CPU installed, which is what we're looking for. Let's go ahead and enter the BIOS, make sure everything is showing up right, and we can kind of go from there. Go ahead and hit delete on restart to go ahead and enter our BIOS right here. We are missing the LEDs on this fan right here. I'm assuming it's just probably a loose cable, so we'll go ahead and fix that in just a second. But if everything else is working, that looks like we were just dealing with a bad motherboard, which is probably our best case scenario because the GPU was probably going to be the most expensive thing that we would have to replace. And I was getting pretty concerned that that possibly could have been bad. So let's take a look. Just enter easy mode, be easier to see. Yep, we got both sticks of memory showing up, which is good. We're going to go ahead and enable the XMP profile, which is good. And we have our SATA SSD showing up. And I believe we also have our M.2 drive showing up in the boot sequence, which is great. CPU temperature looks better than it was before, which is awesome. That's probably from the new thermal paste. And it looks like everything else is good to go. So I bet you if we go ahead and save and exit, the system will load right up into Windows, which is exactly what we needed to do. And basically we just have to fix a couple things, and then we basically can take some pictures of the system and get it listed to get it sold. So while we load this up, I want to go ahead and talk about this process. You know, the biggest concern here with going kind of in blind is there could have been an issue with that GPU. And in that case, I would have probably just broke even. With the GPU being bad, I had to spend about $100 to about $120 on a motherboard. Luckily, I had one available that was brand new, so that wasn't too big of a deal. But that still puts us around that $450 to $500 mark for the cost of putting the system back up and running, which I think we're going to try to list it for about $800, but we'll see. I got to go ahead and analyze the current market in my area, and then we'll go ahead and throw it up on some places like Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, and a site that I went ahead and featured for a sponsored video a while back, which was called jawa.gg, and that's a really cool site because this is a great place where you can sell these type of systems. All right, with this system all loaded up, all we got to do is fix this LED for the front fan, and besides that, we're going to be pretty much good to go with this system. The only thing that we're going to need to do now is reload Windows, go ahead and run our testing with the system, which I'll be back for in just a few minutes, and from there, all we got to do is clean up some cables, and we'll go ahead and get this system listed. All right, I'll be right back. So Windows is now reinstalled and the system is running pretty good, but we do have one little issue. The fan for the CPU cooler is running really loud and the RGB on it doesn't even work. So just because I don't want to sell the system like that, just as a possible complaint or anything like that, we're going to go ahead and upgrade the CPU cooler to a really basic tower cooler from ID Cooling. It's an all white model, which is going to look really nice in the system. So let me go ahead and get that swapped out and I'll be right back. I got the brand new white cooler installed from ID Cooling, and I gotta say that it looks absolutely beautiful in this system, as it really adds a little extra touch, as it adds that kind of white fill out in the very center of the case, and it ties to the white accents around it. So I'm really happy with how all that all turned out, and it's doing really well as it's keeping the CPU nice and cool and quiet, which is something that the other cooler wasn't able to do. So I'm really happy with how this all turned out, and as this system, I don't think I talked too much about the specs, but it's a Ryzen 5 5600X, we got an RTX 3060, and we got the brand new cooler. We got 32 gigabytes of DDR4 RAM, we got a 500 gigabyte NVMe drive, and a 1 terabyte normal hard drive. So it's a pretty nice system, and I think I'm gonna list it for about $800. As we spent about $350 on the system itself, and then we spent another $80 on the motherboard and another $20 on the cooler itself. So that could be a nice $350 profit. I'm hoping at the low end that we get about $750, so we can get a nice $300 profit, but we have a little bit of wiggle room. So if something else comes up, I'm happy to go ahead and take a lower offer, but we'll see. But in the meantime, I'm really happy with how everything turned out, and I really enjoyed doing this, so I'm planning on making some more videos like this in the future. So what I'll do is I'm gonna list this. Once it's listed and it sells, I'll talk about it in our next video when we do our next PC flip to go ahead and update you guys with what we actually got. Or if you guys want me to make a short-term piece on it, go ahead and let me know and I can go ahead and talk about what we actually sold it for. So if you guys enjoyed this video and you guys want to see more like this, go ahead and throw a like at it, subscribe, and leave a comment down below for what do you want me to try next. And if you have any questions, drop them down there as well. I'm really thankful for all of you guys for coming by, and I'll see you guys in the next video.